TSN MMA Podcast. Dana White joins us in studio. Dana, how are you?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
Good. We got the AC cranked for
Yeah,
you.
yeah. It's the AC is definitely working in this room.
Well, I've got my jacket on, so I've got to make sure that I'm nice and cozy in here. So it's been over a year since the WME-IMG deal. How's life changed for you since that deal? What do you miss the most about the previous regime, and what do you like the most about the new regime?
Well, obviously, what I miss the most is Lorenzo. He and I worked together every day, and it was awesome. He's my best friend. But Ari's been fantastic too. Ari and I work really well together. So, other than the whole Lorenzo thing, I haven't really skipped a beat.
Is this like the biggest purchase that they've made in terms of WME-IMG? Like, this is a pretty big egg in their basket, correct?
Definitely. I don't know if this is the biggest, but it's a big, and it's very important to them.
So the dust has barely settled from UFC 216 with Ferguson beating Kevin Lee. He's now the interim champion. Are you guys working around the clock to make Conor versus Ferguson happen for UFC 219?
It's the fight that I want, yeah. I wouldn't say we've worked around the clock since the fight's out. I've been on the road.
Well, you only have to deal with one agent in this case, I guess, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't deal with that. I deal with Conor. I talk to Conor. So right after the fight, I jumped on a plane, went to London, Germany, New York. Now I'm in Toronto. Then I go to Montreal. Then I get home. And when I get home, I'll start working on it.
Conor hasn't said a word about Ferguson. Why the radio silence, do you think?
Conor really hasn't said a word about anybody. Conor's been doing his thing. After the fight, he went to Ibiza and hung out, and he hasn't said a peep to me about anybody or anything.
So GSP's back, obviously. He has said he's going to retire if he loses. Bisping said he might retire if he wins. So with that in mind, do you ever cheer for a certain outcome knowing that if GSP wins, he's going to fight again and Bisping's probably going to fight again, and it gives you more of a license to print money?
No, I'm happy that GSP's back. He's one of the greatest 170-pounders ever, and he's a good guy. So it's good to have him back.
Well, I know for me, with Kevin Lee and Ferguson, I was really hoping Lee would win because I would have loved to see a Lee and Conor build-up, because Lee on the mic he's a star.
It's true. No, that would have been some good stuff between those two. He's pretty hardcore.
So now you look at Conor and some of the other stars. I mean, we mentioned George. If you had to bet money on one person in the UFC right now, having that it factor that's really going to be a transcendent star in the sport, who would it be?
I like Francis Ngannou. I think Francis Ngannou can be the next big thing, literally and figuratively.
Despite the language barrier?
Oh, yeah. Listen, when you're a badass, language has nothing to do with it, man. It's all about how you look at Anderson Silva.
And George, I guess, too.
Yeah, George St. Pierre. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's about your performances, not. Listen, we think about the talking because Conor's so good. Conor's a great fighter, and every time he opens his mouth, it's hilarious. But you find those guys every once in a blue moon.
You want to hear a crazy Ngannou story?
Yeah.
So I saw George talking to Ngannou backstage last week, and the first time I interviewed Francis, I said, George has just announced he's coming back. What do you think of him? And he goes, never seen him fight. Because he had just started learning MMA like 2-3 years prior.
Right.
And George, at that point, had already taken his hiatus. Isn't that wild when you think about how much Ngannou has absorbed in these last couple of years?
It is crazy, and it also just shows how fast somebody can come up. You never saw a GSP fight.
Yeah, I mean, Ngannou's just...
And they're both French.
They're both French. Yeah, they were talking in French backstage. It was cool to see. So then you look at free agency, and people had often said that there was no free agency in MMA, but obviously there has been. I mean, if you look at Ben Henderson, he just lost over the weekend or a couple weeks ago. Lorenz Larkin. Is there anybody who has left the UFC that you really regret not being able to bring back?
No. Normally, when guys go, it's time for them to go. It's time for them to move on to that next chapter of their career. No, I off the top of my head right here, right now, nobody that I can think of.
Yesterday, Rafael Dos Anjos said he thought his fight with Robbie Lawler should be an interim title fight. Given the amount of times that Woodley's defended the belt, is that one of the more crazy things you've heard in a while?
Yeah. He let me know it. Believe me, he was texting me the last couple of days.
But what's the difference between an interim title and a promise that they're going to get the next shot? Is there just more monetary?
An interim title fight is when, a division gets clogged up, and I don't like, I feel like guys like Tony Ferguson. Tony came, he was ready to fight, and, it was for an interim title, and Khabib couldn't make weight, and then essentially couldn't fight. So, situations like that.
And finally, Jon Jones. Obviously, he might get a 2 to 4 year suspension. We don't know what's going to happen with him. I don't really want to speculate on that. But if he does get a long-term suspension, is it the most wasted talent you've possibly ever seen in sports?
Ever. In all of sports, yeah. The guy is so talented and gifted. God knows what he'd be doing right now if he had never gotten in trouble. He could possibly be the heavyweight champion and have the defense record that couldn't be broken. And, the list goes on and on of what could have been with Jon Jones.
Do you hope that it's a short suspension? Like, do you, in your mind, from a business perspective, hope it's a short suspension? Or you just don't, you let them take care of it?
Yeah, whatever happens, happens. Believe me, I'm not mentally or emotionally invested in that anymore.
All right, Dana. Well, pleasure having you here. We look forward to next time you're in Toronto, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, we got some time with the boss. That was great having Dana White in studio with us for the TSN MMA show. Obviously promoting a big card, UFC 217 in New York. Now, the thing that stuck out to me, Joe, is I asked him, as we just heard, who the biggest next big star would be in the UFC, and he said Francis Ngannou, and I thought that was an interesting answer.
Yeah, it's me too. I mean, I just don't know if he has the personality to be that star.
Yeah, but you know what? When you see guys knock out guys in impressive fashion in the first round, fight after fight after fight, you start to get that Mike Tyson type
the
fear,
fear, the quiet fear.
Yeah, the quiet fear that people have. And the thing about Ngannou is he hasn't been in the sport for a long time. He's only been training like 3 years.
I think he only has, 4 fights in the UFC, if something?
4 or 5, yeah.
Yeah, not much.
All impressive victories, though. And I think Ngannou, if he could get past Overeem,
I'm going to say that's his
big title
test.
shot, and that's where, that's a big test. And then Stipe is an even bigger test. I mean, for a guy who has that little experience in the sport to try to beat a guy like Stipe Miocic, who's just so advanced in wrestling, boxing, everything that he does so well, that's going to be a tall mountain to climb.
What do you think it is with Stipe that why he's not bigger than he actually is? Like, I mean, if he's, because people are now talking about him as one of the pound for pound best in the sport, but he's just not putting the numbers out.
Yeah, that's the thing. He gets those nice wins and he beats guys, but on the mic during fight week, there's nobody worse to talk to. And it's not a knock against Stipe. It's just he doesn't have he's got so much confidence in himself and he thinks he's going to win the fight. But he's not the type of guy. He's like a gentleman. He doesn't want to call guys out much. He'll say, I'm going to beat this guy. But in terms of trash talk and things like that, he just doesn't have it. But at the same time, his fights are always exciting. He's a lot of fun, and he's a great guy. He's just a wonderful human being. He's just a friendly guy.
But looking back at my career now that I'm on this side of the table, looking at the sport as an entertainment, I look back and was like, I should have been better talking. I felt like if I would have trash talked, not necessarily trash talk, but had a little bit more excitement on, or a little bit more coaching, I think it could have helped so much more. Like, I mean, with GSP, with that little bit more, could have been even that much better.
Right.
Those guys that are just so talented, but they had those little bit of coaching or that little bit of acting or that little bit of that PR person behind their ears. I think it just takes these guys to a new level, and they have to. Fighters are relying too much on the organizations to promote themselves and not enough on themselves. So that's where the guys like Stipe need to do those extras to build himself.
Yeah, and we heard that with Demetrius Johnson. Demetrius says it's not on me to promote myself; it's on the organization. I disagree with that.
Totally
completely.
Disagree.
Yeah.
Like, you can't rely on the UFC. They have so many fighters to promote.
Well, so many fights to promote.
If you're fighting
so
3 times a year, I mean, where are you going to promote yourself in between your fights? The hardest thing as a fighter to keep relevant in the sport is what are you doing in between your fights?
Yeah.
When you have so much content during fight week, you talk about your pre-fight interviews, you have pre-fight videos, you have highlights of your last fights. There's so much content. But then after their fights, there's nothing. You have to keep yourself relevant. You have to keep doing things.
It's about standing out
Absolutely.
and doing something that, well, not only keeps you relevant, but even during fight week, there's so much content out there. There's so many. I mean, I know from covering all these fight weeks this year, you talk to all these guys and you get clips and you watch these videos, and there's just so much stuff out there. You need to say something that's going to stand out, that's going to become a story.